First of all, I'd like to welcome the changes introduced by the Minister. They're very, very timely. The old limits which will be set in 2011 belonged to a totally different world. And I have to say, over the years when I was asking about when these changes would take place, I got the tired-out answer that the matter was being studied. But for those who are suffering under incredibly low thresholds, telling them that you're looking at the system isn't much satisfaction. And I'm glad the Minister just went and did the simple thing. And I often think in politics, we've got an infinite ability nowadays to make the simple things complicated and to leave people who need something hanging on there, not able to get it. Under the previous limits, I had the absolute ridiculous situation in my constituency where I had people with big families whose sole income were from the Department of Social Protection. There might have been a carer's allowance thrown in there or so on for a child with a disability, but the sole income was from the department. And they were over the threshold, the income threshold. So I had one family that moved from County Galway to Galway City, where they were just under the threshold because they were in different bands. Now I have to say that a big issue that arose, because when you go to the edge of Galway City into the county area, the rents are no different. A big welcome move that was made by the Minister in that he gave Galway County 2 jumps. He moved the band from 3 to 2, and then he gave the general rise that's given across the country, and that has risen the income limit by 10,000, and I welcome that. Now, what I would say is the decision made is very, very welcome. It's timely, it's simple, but it makes a big improvement for those who come into your office looking to get on the housing list. Now, of course, the system is afraid of encouraging demand. But they can only encourage demand from people who need a house. And it is my belief that most people who would have the opportunity of buying a house would buy a house in preference to getting a local authority house, because then it's yours and you can do what you want with it. So I don't believe there's too many people out there who want to get on the housing list that would be able otherwise to buy a house. And therefore I think that it's a spurious argument, and it's very interesting that in some local authorities up to 2011 there was no income limit at all. If you said you needed it, you could go on the list. This is fascinating. It would be very interesting to look what the demand absolutely enormous in those counties, or had they no income limit because they didn't have a big demand. And because in those counties being able to afford their own home was more affordable because lots of people were able to build on their own sites. Now, the next point I'd like to make in the few minutes I have is we're great at getting experts and academics to look at things, and I'm not against that if you follow the second part of the process. But somebody who's far removed from it, no matter how many degrees they have, no matter how scholarly they have, will take an academic approach to life. And they're very likely to come up with a scheme that's based on what they perceive is the way that people should act. But we all know in our constituency clinics that the way people actually act in this world is much more varied, much more complex, and is not necessarily the theoretical way that people should act. We have all had experience of getting people in very, very similar circumstances coming into you. And whether they own their house or they're looking to get a local authority house, no matter what their life circumstances are, you often find that different people handle money very, very differently. Some people can make money go much further. Some people on very modest incomes could afford and would aspire, and if they were given the money, would get a loan for a house and pay it back. And they had in the past when things were a bit easier. And there are other people who might even have a higher income who wouldn't be ever able to handle it for one reason or another, And I'm not making any moral judgments. I'm saying this is what you find. So life is complex. And creating theoretical models often doesn't match the realities of people's lives. So I have a view that the income limits should be more set with allowing an overlap between that threshold of being able to get the loan to buy your house. And let's be honest about it. People in quite reasonable incomes find it, even to get the state loans from the local authorities, find it very, very difficult to get them. Hard-working people. So my belief is that you find out by practice the level at which the vast majority of people can get a loan. And that becomes one threshold, and then the people beneath that would be eligible for local authority housing. But you can't get it that it's the most parsimonious, the most careful, the most prudent, the most whatever, is that's the cut-off. You have to take a much more nuanced view. I also think that sometimes changes are made and the system thinks they've had come up with great ideas. The first bad idea, in my view, was HAP. Because in the old days, at the moment, if you are eligible for local authority housing, permanent local authority housing, you're also eligible for HAP. So if you raise the limit for one, you immediately raise the limit for the other, and that has consequences. And it doesn't allow for too much social nuance in the way that the old system did, where you had the social welfare system paying the mortgage or the rental supplement, and their system was totally independent of eligibility for housing. And it was done on a different type of means assessment, so they weren't inextricably linked. And you couldn't be accused of putting up private rents. And one of the problems with the HAP system, that we all know it, it's a great rent inflator. And who's gaining? The landlord, but not the tenant. And they're just chasing each other around, and then they're putting the money into their pocket way above the differential rent to try and make up the difference. It's a very, very flawed system. Now, and of course, the answer to all of that is build more houses. It's very, very simple, build more houses. But one other major change is by bringing the limits down, by being very fussy about eligibility. We have stopped working people being eligible for local authority houses. We have reduced the social mix in the housing estates. Certainly in my constituency, the only people who are eligible are people who are unemployed. And therefore you get issues in relation to the public perception of social housing that wasn't as prevalent in the past, where most of the people who would have been in social housing, if you went back to the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, 60s, were actually working people with jobs. Now, I would like to see much more integrated estates, and raising the income limits is absolutely key to that. And making it that when you make that jump from being dependent on welfare into work, that you're not immediately cut off at the past. Could I come to a parochial point that is a big issue in Galway? When you apply for housing to Galway City Council, you get a choice of the areas you would like to live in. So you've got Galway City East and Galway City West, but you can also put down the county area as a choice. That's the area of Galway County Council. When you apply for housing to Galway County Council, you can put down areas in the county, but you can also put down the city. However, I have yet to see anybody on the city list getting a house in the county, and even more so, it is absolutely highly unlikely that anybody on the county list will get a house in the city, because there's huge pressure for housing in the city. So after about 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, the person who put down, in good faith, the option of the city and then the county, thinking they would be assessed and considered in the county equal to everybody else, that was an equal length of time in the list, find that they're not really being considered at all by the local authority with which they're not registered. And then they're on the horns of a dilemma, because if, for example, they change from the city list to the county list, which would not be as long, and you might be more likely to get a house, they find that they have to go back to the back of the queue. I have been on to the department, because this is department driven. It was part of their great amalgamation plans of the two local authorities in Galway that they wanted to stretch from the River Suck in Ballinasloe the whole way west to Clifton and Inishboffin and Ballyconneely, halfway across the country and more. And it is time that the department resolved this issue and said that if you're on the city list or the county list, you should be considered equally for your area of preference, irrespective of which list you are on. As we said back a number of elections ago, a lot has been done in the last 2 years. Nothing was done in the previous 9, except regression, in my view. But the only thing I would say is a lot done, a lot more to do. And until everybody has an opportunity of getting permanent, secure tenancy, we cannot rest on our laurels.